Welcome to the Faith and Family Ministry Leader Podcast. Thoughtful conversations for leaders navigating family ministry in the local church today. And today we're going to talk about family ministry and senior leadership. Oh, how this is quite the waters to navigate for children's pastors, student pastors, family pastors, and going, okay, we want to see this ministry thrive. How are we serving the vision of the senior pastor, senior leadership? Where often are there tensions here, frustrations here? Usually when you start having these conversations with children's pastors and youth pastors, they're going, well, I don't really ever have time to talk with my senior pastor to see it. Am I doing a good job? Am I not doing a good job? Those sorts of things. So I want to kick this conversation off with asking the three of you who all function in senior executive leadership roles. Why is a healthy family ministry so essential for the life of the church from the senior leadership perspective? And I think this is really actually rare for leaders to get to hear. Why is it so essential? Why do churches have it? Why do we want to see it do well? Dr. Michelle, let's go to you first.
Well, I think the vitality of your church is really dependent upon all of the family to thrive, right? Mm-hmm. So to have just one aspect of your church thriving doesn't make a healthy church family. It's not a healthy church culture. And so I think it is important for senior leaders to look at all of the ages and stages and to make sure that there's healthy teaching, there's healthy discipleship happening, there's accountability, there's funding, there's resources of other sorts that they have what they need. And it is important because to neglect one of them, we might not feel the impact right away, but generationally, we will start feeling that impact. And you can see that in churches that maybe didn't invest in the youth or the children. And their church just continues to age. And what we see across North America are churches just shutting down one by one because there's 10 or 12 80 to 90-year-olds left, and they just didn't invest in the next generation. Yeah. And it didn't show itself right away, but it showed itself over time. And so I think it's important, but the opposite is true. You can be putting a tremendous amount of energy and resources into children and youth and neglect the older generation. And then over time, what you have is maybe a booming church without wisdom, without the funding of the tithes and offerings and things like that. So it's important for senior leadership to be looking at all of those across the board.
I think it's very easy for ministries to become siloed. So when you hire someone who's passionate about whatever it is their field is, whether it's youth ministry or kids ministry or whatever, men's ministry, whatever the different ministry expression might be, if you hire somebody who's passionate about that, they're going to run at that, and they're going to run hard. And I think that means it's the senior leader's responsibility to make sure that all of those various ministries and personalities and visions, that they're all aligned in the common goal of the vision of the church and how all of that works together for the whole life of the family and everyone else in the church. So I think it's really important for us as senior leaders in family ministry to just go let's make sure that this is integrated, that it's not an appendage of something the church does, but it's integrated into the life of the whole church.
That's really good.
Huge.
Yeah. Go back to the metaphor of the sheep and the shepherd and the flock. That's the metaphor that we see in the New Testament. So a healthy flock has got the full orb of generations. You've got the young lambs. They're easy to spot. They're all over the place. They're bouncing off the fields and running wild into the bushes, off the ravines. And then you've got the more mature sheep who have learned to hear the voice of the shepherd. They bring stability. They bring security. They bring a certain sense of calmness to the flock. And you need all these generations. In the same way of the church, a healthy flock, a healthy body of Christ needs all of those generations represented as well. Healthy sheep reproduce of their sheep. And so when we see that in the natural flock, we also see that in the church. And so we need all these generations. And so a board, a pastor who recognizes that is going to make sure that they prioritize at the appropriate time all the various generations to make sure that we have a healthy congregation and flock.
Yeah, all of it coming together. I'm curious to hear from the three of you, and it would be, I think, really interesting for our listeners, whether they're coming from the perspective of a children's pastor, or we have a senior leader listening, going, okay, like this could be an opportunity to go, okay, what are some things that like senior leaders desire their family ministry leaders to know? You know, so I think oftentimes they're just like the unspoken, like you should assume the unspoken. This is what I want of you. This is what I desire. Or this is why I'm not going to give you more stage time in the main service. Or this is why I'm not going, you know, I'm weighing more things than just your budget or your ministry initiatives that you're asking. And I think sometimes family ministry leaders get left in the ether of assuming it's not a priority to them. Ryan, getting to listen to you over the past couple days for our Dream Team Summit here, I felt has been really insightful to go, well, it's really easy to talk about this as like a family ministry, how we're going to invest in the next generation. And then you've brought there's this perspective, this is how a senior pastor is weighing that reality and having to organize staffing and those sorts of things. So if you could summarize 1 or 2 points from your perspective, and Michelle, you have a really unique perspective here too of you've functioned in all roles. You've been a children's pastor, you've been a youth pastor, you've been a family pastor, you're a senior executive pastor now here at our church. And so you've kind of got to see it from both perspectives now of going, I know what I've cried out for and what I wanted to know. And now as the senior executive leader, I see the perspective of why certain decisions are made. What would you want to tell family pastors, from your perspective?
Yeah.
Well, I think being clear about expectations is really, really important anytime we're building a team. I think expectations is what really brings fulfillment of expectations is what really brings excellence. So, like, I don't really think it's like necessarily going above and beyond expectations, because that can be even superfluous and extraneous. In other words, you can have a worker on your staff who thinks they're killing it because they did 20 things you didn't ask them to do. But actually, they're not doing the 2 things that I really, really want them to do. But they think it's great because they're genuinely sincere and they're throwing themselves at it, doing these other things. But my expectation was that these 2 things are really the most important. They may not see the big picture for that. So if I, as a senior leader, then blame them for that reality and they don't know what my expectations are, that actually isn't on them. That's on me for not being clear about my expectations. So I think clarity on expectations is really, really important. If we go into a fine restaurant, and in that fine restaurant, the waiter comes to a table with a cigarette dangling from his mouth and greasy shoes and asks us, "What can I get you, bud?" That's a terrible experience, right?
Yeah.
And likewise, if you go into Bob's Burger Shack and some guy comes up to you with a white cloth over his wrist, wearing a tux, and goes, "What would you like on your burger, sir?" Right? If he's doing that, like it's like completely out of alignment with your expectations for that reality. So it's not. Expectations are really, really important, I think, in leading people in ministry. That leading that team we have to be clear with each other on what are the expectations for that, and that's, I think, my responsibility to do as a senior leader.
So good.
You used one word I'd say was sort of the operative word is alignment. I'm happy that the children's ministry is thriving, the youth ministry is like taking new ground, but it all has to come into alignment. At the end of the day, the senior leader, the senior pastor, is accountable to, in most governance models, the board, elders or deacons or whatever it might be, the congregation. And whatever is done in these various departments must be in alignment with the priorities of the senior pastor. And it's important that these other staff members recognize that and make sure that what they're doing is not contradictory or it's not off the rails. It may be great for them, but it's not in alignment with what the senior leader needs and what the congregation as a whole needs. So recognizing the role that you play in your family ministry and how that comes into alignment with the priorities, the expectations of the senior pastor and the board, I think that's also very critical for long-term success and viability.
Huge.
Yeah.
Michelle?
Yeah, it's understanding the different hats that we wear. And because I've sat in those different seats, you kind of have a different perspective. And it was mentioned, we mentioned that, you have different passions, and that's why God's put you in those positions. And so if you're a kids pastor, you're a student ministry pastor, or even a family pastor, that is your unique passion. I mean, you are laser focused on this, sometimes even myopic.
Yeah. That's
and that is your focus. You wake up every day and you think about young people coming to know Jesus and discipling them and their families and their home life and the things they're dealing with. A senior pastor doesn't wake up every day and have that laser focus. He has a different calling, or she has a different calling on her life. And they shouldn't resent one another for that. They should see that as part of the body of Christ being fulfilled. And I think younger me was more like, well, how come you don't appreciate what I'm doing? How come you're not giving me more accolades or pats on the back or attaboys or something? And why aren't you as passionate about this as I am? Well, if you were as passionate about this as I am, then you'd be a children's pastor. You'd be a student pastor. But you're a senior pastor, which means you have maybe that 35, 40,000 foot view of church, and then you've hired either volunteers or staff members to specialize in that. And what I have experienced is that oftentimes if I'm doing a good job in those roles, then there isn't a lot of banter that goes back and forth. It's, when something is deficit, that's probably when you're going to hear about it. And at first, that can be offensive. But I think I now, even as a senior leader, where my attention is going is to fix something. And my superstars might not even get all of that attention.
They're running and they're not making messes.
Yeah, and I want to get out of their way. And I think that's a dynamic we have to just become comfortable with. Now, because I sat in the other seat, I really endeavor and I try to put energy towards letting them know that they're seen. Sending
because that's still important.
Sending a text message, making sure I'm writing an email, telling them how proud I am of this, or that I noticed that, or I'll show up. And even if it's just for a few minutes, I want to just show up in the back and let them know that I was there, or that I've seen it, or watch their socials, or different things like that, just so that they feel seen. But I think I have that perspective because I sat there, and I do think if senior pastors are listening, your kids ministry, your student ministry sometimes, but mostly your kids ministry, those leaders feel largely unseen.
Very.
They feel really
undervalued
in the trenches, and I you can war against that. You could say, no, that you're doing this for the kingdom and the Lord, but it is really the most unseen ministry in the church. It's not as visible. Student ministries even gets noticed a little bit more. And then your adult ministries tend to get the most limelight. And so I think you have some really faithful servants serving in the kids area. And they are doing that as unto the Lord. And he sees that and he rewards them. But I used to have a senior pastor that on the first day of kids camp, he would text me and say, I know you have a really intense week ahead of you. I'm praying for you. Great job on all the hard work of getting to this point. And that little text just meant so much to me. And there's those little things that will go a really long way.
A really long way. Because the simple text of seeing seen. And I that's why I like this conversation, because it's the opportunity to be seen both ways. Working at a large church, I remember when I took over the junior high ministry, And there had been a awkward situation of obviously how the transition took place with the prior guy, which is fairly common in most churches. And so I remember the assumption of, okay, Tim, come in and run the junior high ministry. And I remember sitting there going like, what's the expectation here? I don't want to miss the mark that the last guy did, but I'm still unsure of what the mark was that he missed, you know? And so I took the leap of faith of reaching out to my senior pastor. I obviously knew he's got a lot going on in his plate, and what's the worst he could say was no, and we wouldn't talk anyway. The best case scenario was he said yes, which he did. Took him to lunch, and I just said, hey, I want to hear from your mouth. What do you expect of me? What is a win for you? And what is your desire when it comes to seeing this ministry flourish? Yeah. And he was so eager to share those two things that were, this is what I want you, this is what I want you to focus on. And there's room to grow, and there's room for you to explore, but these are the things that are the essentials. So I think it's an invitation, too, for younger leaders to go, you might not ever get the amount of time you think you should with the senior leader, but you can become a student of your senior leader. You can pay attention to the way they lead, and you can learn a lot by seeing what they value from the way they're leading your staff meetings, the way they're leading the church, and going, okay, I see some clear parameters for what I need to run in. Mike, I want to kick this question to you first because you've done a lot of work in executive coaching for senior leaders, senior pastors. What do you feel are some great tangible or practical ways that senior leadership can strengthen the relationship between themselves and their family ministry team? What are some practical, like just leadership tools that go, hey, pay attention to these things as you're leading your church so that you can be aware of kind of what's going on? What would you say?
Yeah, and you hit a little bit there in terms of clear communication of expectations. You know, what is a win to you? What are your expectations of me, of my leadership, and in the way that I serve here under your leadership? What is the standard of measurement by which you will be measured, and how I can contribute to that and make you a success? Because I think when you recognize and put yourself in the moccasins of him as he's walking his mile, so to speak, what's a win look like to him, and how can I help him get there? Because when you help him succeed, we all win.
Right.
And so, I mean, what person doesn't want a team player who's going to say, my reason for being on the team is to make sure that you score?
Right.
Yes.
I mean, I want to work with a guy like that.
Yes.
So that man or that woman is going to be the type of person that I'm going to work well with. I'm going to make sure that I resource them, because when you win, I win. When I win, you win. And that's the best way to do it. But all of that comes down to communication of expectations.
Yes. Yeah, that's huge. Huge.
Yeah, I often think about leaders who work in the family ministry sphere, wherever it is, kids do. I call them drought-resistant plants, meaning that they're a different stock.
They're a breed.
They will be faithful and show up and do countless hours with very little watering. But we should never take advantage of that.
No. Yeah.
We should never take advantage of that. And shame on us if on our watch, the leaders who are taking care of the most vulnerable in our churches are not well taken care of.
Yeah.
So,
No, that's so good. Pastor Ryan, what would you add to that?
I think a good sort of image for me is the image of a rowing boat. And I think I used to row with an 8, and we had 8 guys in the boat, and someone at the front of the boat steering. And the amazing thing about rowing with 8 people in a boat just a few inches wider than your hips is that any shift in weight completely makes the whole thing just kind of like almost capsize. Like you really have to be in alignment. You're kind of staring at the shoulders of the person in front of you, and you're in rhythm with each other. You're in the same timing. And in one of our races that we were competing in, we actually had some guys that were associated but not on our regular crew, but they were Olympic rowers. So we had this idea of dropping these Olympic rowers into the boat with us so that would propel us to victory.
Wow.
The thing was, we dropped them in the boat. We went slower than we did without them.
Wow.
And it was because they're so powerful, they're so much better than we were. But they weren't in the same rhythm that everybody else was. They just weren't in the same, it just wasn't, that kind of thing is kind of like a dance. It's all about timing and rhythm and being in the same zone. And I just think that's a really good analogy for ministry, because there's something about the rhythm of ministry that's about being in that same space, and that it involves spending a lot of time together. It involved clear communication. It involved, developing relationships, even in that kind of competitive environment. But in ministry, I just think that how much more is that kind of alignment important. And it doesn't matter if a person's a rock star if you drop them down in a place where they're not really in rhythm and in alignment with everybody else. And I think that, sometimes people don't feel valued, because I love the point you made, Michelle, about just how much value something very simple can be. And sometimes for me, it's like I feel like I don't have time to give people everything that I want them to have. I want them to be encouraged, and I want them to hear from me and those things. And I don't always feel that I have the time to do that. But I love that idea of just even those small gestures that make them a part of the crew. And I think we're all really going in the same direction, and we're all heading in the same place. I think that's really important.
So good.
2 practical things senior leaders can do. And I try to do these. Number 1, don't start every conversation with how many people came to da-da-da.
Yeah, attendance.
It's something senior leaders ask a lot. But if it's your first question, you're telling them what's most important. And in a world where we want to disciple, to say how many people were there can be deflating if you had these really amazing discipleship moments, but not as many people showed up. So I like to ask first, tell me something meaningful that happened, or a life transformation story. But I have to find out how many people were there too, but maybe not the first question. And then I think the second thing is just being aware that we are we're kind of on 2 different planets at sometimes, and just that grace, just that grace and that dance. And so one of the questions I like to ask my team is, what's something I don't know? Tell me something I don't know.
What are my blind spots?
Yeah, what are my blind spots? And to maybe take them, I'll take a group to lunch, and I say, I want everybody to go around and tell me something I don't know. And it might be about the culture, it might be about something I'm doing or not doing, and then to genuinely have ears to hear, not to defend myself, and just create an open culture of grace that says, there's things I don't know, and I'm not going to assume that I know them all. So
so good.
Such good practical help. This is a really rich conversation, and it speaks to the gift of being a body of Christ, us getting to work together to see how God is helping us enable the family to flourish, both in the main sanctuary and in the kids, children's, and student ministry. We understand that this can actually be an interesting topic. Sometimes it can be filled with pain. Sometimes it can be filled with excitement, and anywhere in between. And so our prayer for you is that as you continue to navigate whatever ministry context the Lord has placed you in, that He would surround you with humility, grace, and mercy to trust God with what He's called you to do, and invite you to take courageous steps to, whether it's from the top down or from the bottom up, to nurture these relationships. Because when we do, the church flourishes. So if you would like to find some more information or further resources or podcast conversations, you can visit our website at the-iff.com. We hope you have a wonderful day. Grace, mercy, peace be with you.